All right, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you might be. Welcome to the Los Angeles and Orange County Mental Health Session 1 event, a foundation of understanding for leaders. We're going to get started here momentarily. We are allowing people to log on, and I'm watching our headcount go up significantly. My name is Andrew Agris. I am the president of the Los Angeles National Human Resources Association. We also have several people that we will be introducing in the next couple of minutes, but my partner in crime and co-host for today's event is Shannon Ashworth. Shannon is the director and chair of programs for the Orange County National Human Resources Association. And we are thrilled and proud to bring to you today's first session on mental health. This will be a two-part series, and we will soon be introducing our mental health council and the people that have been behind the scenes putting in tireless hours to bring this session to you, as well as our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council that we will speak on a little bit later. Okay. So, Shannon, am I touching on this or are you touching on this?
Yep, you're still on.
Still going. Okay. So for both LA and for Orange County, we'd love for you to connect with us on our social media. We have the hashtags, we have the different Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn accounts where you can connect with us on social media. We want to hear from you. We want your insight. We want your feedback. Please share your thoughts on today's session and upcoming sessions, but specifically today's session, if you wouldn't mind. All right, and then what we are going to go through very briefly is just the sponsors for LA NHRA. We'd like to thank our annual premier partners, Bolton and Company, Challenger Gray and Christmas, Cressa, Fisher Phillips, Sageview, Into, UCLA Extension, and Rough Gut Recruiting.
Terrific, thank you. And likewise, sponsors are what make these events possible, especially over this last year where we've been offering all of our programming free of charge and also open to those who may not be members. And we're so glad for all who have been able to join. We'd like to thank the Orange County affiliates annual premier sponsors. We have Apex Executive Search, Leaderology, Bolton and Company, OC Tanner, Challenger Gray and Christmas, Burnham, Ultimate Software, Lee Hecht Harrison, and we thank all of you for your continued support. We'd also really like to thank today's specific event sponsor, Into, and I have the privilege of doing a little bit of an introduction on this great organization. So first, we would like to thank Into and Marilyn Stemper, their National Sales Director, for supporting us as today's program sponsor. Into is the career development and outplacement flagship for GI Group, a global leader in HR and talent solutions. Into has 20 plus years of experience in delivering high touch, people-focused programs to more than 20,000 companies around the world. They are experts in creating personalized one-on-one coaching and technology innovation that enables organizations of all sizes to protect their employer brand throughout the employee life cycle with flexible solutions to enhance the candidate experience, career mobility, and workforce transition. Intu's award-winning outplacement solution delivers better results as employees depart your organization, with candidates landing nearly 2.5 times faster than the US national average time it takes to find employment. We invite you to check out Intu's innovative solutions and to contact Marilyn Stemper for more information. We also want to take this opportunity to always put a spotlight on the 3 community partners that we have with the Orange County affiliate. Giving back to our community is a really important aspect of our membership with NHRA. And we find that these 3 organizations in particular are doing great work in trying to keep our less fortunate and those who are trying to get out into the workforce employed and able to sustain a career successfully. Today, we want to spotlight in particular Youth Employment Service. If you've never heard of them, they do some excellent work as a nonprofit that's really teaching our youth and our young adults ages 16 to 24, the skills necessary to be able to secure and to maintain meaningful employment. There's many opportunities to be able to get involved. And with us being virtual, this is a terrific time for anyone on this call, wherever you may be throughout our country, to be able to get involved from a virtual standpoint with some upcoming events. They have 2 upcoming Zoom virtual workshops, one on March 23rd and one on April 26th, where you can help to prepare through mock interviews with these high school students who really need to develop these skill sets and ways that you'd be able to give back to our business community. So please be in touch if you have interest, and we'll make sure and contact you with their information after this event.
Thanks, Shannon. We have a lot of different speakers that we're going to be focusing on today. We want to quickly introduce them and then get moving and introduce our council and then really move forward with the presentation. Kevin Martin, the Chief Research Officer from I4CP, Dr. Ken Duckworth, Chief Medical Officer, NAMI National, and Debbie Urbanek, co-founder of D. Whitney Consulting, will be our main speakers for this afternoon's session. And we want to acknowledge the mental health council members who have been on a myriad of calls, scheduling, organizing, making all this possible. We want to thank Dina Barmacy Gray from the Cheesecake Factory, Nathan Lavoit from Silverado, of course, Kevin Martin, myself with Bolton and Company, Michael May Devi with Bosley, Cindy Ballard with Streamline Media, Kathy Mandato, CHRO, Shannon Ashworth, OC Tanner, and Deborah Bonick with D. Whitney Consulting. And with that, what we'd like to do is put this conversation into perspective and introduce Kathy Mandato, who will help frame today's conversation. Kathy?
Thank you, Andrew. Hi, everyone. I'm Kathy, and I'm recovering from 25 years of HR leadership in the entertainment business. I've worked for companies including E! Entertainment, DreamWorks, NBC, Snapchat, and Warner Media. And during my time, I've seen a lot of takedowns, meltdowns, and even breakdowns. Sometimes I think I've seen it all, but nothing really prepared me for that day when an employee entered my office in the midst of a full-blown panic attack. I'd never seen anything like that before. And I, as an HR professional, had always been taught to not get involved in things like that. It seemed like a pretty personal situation. And I'd learned that we were to send people to the EAP and invite them to seek help while they were on leave of absence. But I was never taught how to deal with something like this in the moment, or how to show empathy and compassion for employees who are struggling with mental health issues. Modern leadership looks very different today than it did just a few years ago. If 2020 taught us anything as HR leaders, it taught us to be prepared for the unexpected. And even though the mental health crisis in our country was escalating long before the pandemic, COVID-19 might be the tipping point that the mental health crisis needed to get nearly everyone talking about it today. And also wondering how we in HR and our companies can really help participate in solutions. In an August 2020 survey designed by D. Whitney Consulting and executed by Qualtrics, 56% of the 1,000 US employees polled self-identified as currently being treated for one or more mental health challenges. And according to the American Psychological Association, 1 in 5 people has a diagnosable mental health disorder in a given year. I think those are pretty alarming statistics. Many clinicians have expressed concern that the most profound mental health crisis will be felt when the pandemic begins to diminish and people attempt to resume their normal lives. That is why the NHRA convened the Mental Health Council, which is bringing you this 2-part series. We're starting with this today, the foundation of understanding, because people will not seek help from managers whom they do not feel safe with. Every day, with every interaction, we make choices that create positive or negative experiences for the people around us. Today's meeting will power up your ability to create an environment rich in psychological safety and inspired human connection where all employees will feel safe to ask for the help that they need. So today we will learn the latest mental health data, recognize symptoms of mental illness, understand the importance of belonging and psychological safety, gain a new perspective on the leader's role, and start building that foundation of understanding of employee mental health. I know what your first question is going to be, and that will be, what are the legal ramifications of this? Well, you have time where you have to frame the foundation before you start to build on this foundation. In session 2 on April 28th, we will host mental health in the workplace, activating new practices for leaders to answer this question for you, as well as give you specific steps to effectively support the employees who are experiencing mental illness. So we hope you'll attend that as well. I'm going to turn it over to Kevin Martin now, who is going to share with you how we as a group believe we're doing and our own, and what our confidence level is and our skill level is when it comes to dealing with mental health at work. Kevin?
Kathy, thank you so much. As I shift over here to show some of these slides, it couldn't be more appropriate to share the following. You just mentioned about, how leadership changed dramatically over the past year. We just conducted a new study that looked at leadership behaviors that were most important since the onset of the pandemic, that executives believe will be even just as important in this new way of work. And of the top 10 behaviors that are viewed as most important, the top 4 all relate to well-being. It's astonishing. And so, speaking of research, we are a research firm. We're not a consultancy. All of the research we do, we correlate back to business performance. And if you hear me reference a high performance organization, it's organizations that in the last 5 years, 3 to 5 years actually, are best in these market indicators. We're not just looking at best practices, we're looking at next practices at I4CP. I circled one in the middle that I think is rather interesting, that talks about the role of employee resource or business resource groups in actually being great leadership development and leader feeder foundational elements. And we do not do vendor sponsored research. So all of our research is pure. It's driven by organizations that you see on the slide right here. We're a member driven research organization. And so all of the data that we put forth as a company reflects executives from these organizations, as well as about 10,000 others, 10 to 20,000 others around the world. So with that, going into this, Kathy, Andrew, and Shannon, and Deb, and I worked together and created 3 questions. And I want to thank a smattering of the folks that are on this particular call today for taking part. We just wanted to test the ground, and from this LA and Orange County audience, we wanted to ask you a few questions about well-being and mental health and your confidence level. And what we're showing you here is just 3 data points. So the first, or multiple data points around 3 questions. The first we asked was, how confident are you in your ability, or how equipped are you to, assist someone who's experiencing some kind of mental health challenge, like what Kathy referenced from the employee that walked into her office. And the way the data broke out wasn't surprising to us. About a third, 36% said, yeah, you know what, we agree, we're equipped to do it. About 40% said, no, I'm not equipped at all. About a quarter were neutral. This adds up to 101%, by the way, because we rounded up. It was such a small data sample. But here's what we found interesting. When we disaggregated the data by small firms, in other words, less than 1,000 employees versus larger, over 1,000 employees, the data was quite stark. Those at larger employees, about 47% at large employees believe that they are equipped. And the vast majority at smaller employees do not feel that way. And I think it speaks to resources that we're seeing around training, manager and supervisor type of mechanisms that support them. The other question we asked was, when you think about supporting an employee with mental health, you feel most secure about what? And what you could see here is on the far left, the strong majority of 61% feel that you just don't feel like you're equipped to actually help that person. And this speaks to why organizations need to be putting forth mechanisms like training on being aware of what signs are, like putting together support guides like Gilead Sciences and Silicon Valley did for their supervisors that say, here are questions you're going to be getting. Here's ways in which you can respond, or things that you can do that really aid when people come to you. And so those are critical and important. The next question we asked was, my organization is strengthening the capabilities of people leaders to support mental and emotional well-being by, and not surprising here, and if your organization's in this area, it's not that you're a laggard organization. Most organizations didn't prioritize this pre-pandemic, but you're in the organization, you're in the large mass where there's a lot that needs to be done. Fully 43% said, I don't know of anything at all that we're doing right now to equip. Only 13% mentioned that they're offering formal training. And this is a tremendous opportunity to gain grounds. Now, I had mentioned before that we're a research firm that does a lot of research. I think we do more research in human capital than any firm we know of. We did multiple studies this past year with Professor Jeff Pfeffer out of Stanford, Professor Rob Cross out of Babson College, as well as with World at Work. And we came out with two major studies in addition to an ancillary study where a couple things really stood out to us. One is that the companies that were best at equipping their workforce around well-being, they were taking a holistic approach. And as you can see, and I put a dotted line or circle around probably the most important data point here for this audience today, is that in the middle of the pandemic, 84% of our entire sample showed that they were putting greater emphasis on mental and emotional health. Now that was about twice the level pre-pandemic when we did our first study. And the 81 versus 44% means that we broke it into, when you break it into organizations of 1,000 employees or more in that regard. So it's just no doubt that the pandemic's had a big impact, and companies are responding or starting, they recognize it, they're starting to respond. And so that's what I wanted to share. And I'm going to turn it over to Deb to get into details, and I'll join you later for some real tactical practices you can put in place at your own firms and as a leader to help with your workforce. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Appreciate it. And hi, everyone. My name is Deborah Bannock, and I'm the co-founder of D. Whitney Consulting. I actually am involved with mental health at work, and it is part of a journey I've been on for a little while. And I just want to share that with you briefly as we get started. I was a culture consultant for many years. And as part of the work I was doing, I was seeing a lot of emphasis on what individuals were feeling. So we were highly focused on employee engagement. And the more and more I got into this work, I realized that a lot of the most important elements when we're looking at culture is what happens between human beings as they come together to get work done. And at the same time, I was going through this journey, I actually was supporting my daughter through a very difficult journey of her own. So she had some serious mental health challenges, including depression and anxiety. And throughout the treatment and journey we were on together, I really came to realize that the work that I was doing with businesses, focusing on their culture, there was a huge gap, a huge lack of resources and information for people who were struggling with mental health challenges. So I developed D. Whitney Consulting, and the practice that we have it has a focus on what we called inspired human connection, which brings mentally healthy practices as well as your common engagement practices into the work that we do. So I was thrilled when they reached out to say that we're doing this project, and I was very happy to be involved. And really my goal tonight with everybody, or this afternoon for all of you on the West Coast, is to make sure that all of us understand that, as Kevin pointed out, companies are really focusing in today on solutions that are policies and programs and thinking about how are we going to help our employees. But the truth is that all of us as individuals are able to start to make a difference with our culture and how people are handling mental health at work today, as long as we are mindful about the things that we do. So I want to start by thinking about that a little bit together and have you go into the employee experience with me as we go through the mental health challenges. So I'm going to start with humanizing what we're going to be talking about with you tonight. And I'm going to talk to you about a gentleman named Miguel. And this story is about 5 minutes, so please sit back and relax and just listen. As you listen, I'd love for you to think about some of the good things that you're seeing that happened to Miguel, and maybe some of the challenges or the things that maybe didn't go so well as we talk about his experience. So Miguel's 29, and he is a production line supervisor for a large global electronics firm. And he's been with the company for about 6 years. And he's earned his way into his position because he is a hardworking guy. He's a bit of a perfectionist, always on, very reliable. And he and his team became known as the Never Fail Five because no matter what was asked of Miguel and his team, they got it done on time, all the time. Now, Miguel was actually raised by a hardworking single mom. And during his teenage years, he started to struggle with anxiety and depression. He was the oldest of three. And as he was facing his challenge, his mother and he went after medical diagnosis after medical diagnosis because Miguel's symptoms were things like he was really lethargic. He couldn't get out of bed. He was having a hard time focusing. He lost weight. He didn't want to eat. He lost interest in all the things that he used to do, like sports and things like that. And the more Miguel slowed down, the more frightened his mom became. So months and months of medical diagnosis was sought. And then finally, they sat down with the doctor who said, it's time for us to look at mental illness. I suspect that Miguel is struggling from depression and anxiety, and he really needs to have therapy. So Miguel remembers looking over at his mother's face and looking at the fear in her face as the doctor said the words mental illness. And as they drove home in the car that day, his mom leaned over and said, Miguel, don't worry. I'm not going to tell anyone about this. This will be our secret. We'll get you that treatment, but we're not going to tell anyone. And for Miguel, he didn't really know what to say to his grandfathers or his siblings. So he said, fine, I'll go along with that plan. So after having ongoing therapy and medication, Miguel was able to succeed through high school and graduate through college. And he ended up getting a job, and he became a shift line supervisor for this global manufacturer. And in that job, he developed a really strong relationship with his boss. His boss's name was Aaron. And Aaron was a person he felt like he could trust. He loved how Erin loved to learn new things. She was curious about things. She asked a lot of questions. She'd bring in experts to come in and talk to her team so that they were always learning and growing together. And one of the things that Miguel really noticed was that when things didn't go so well, when somebody failed or made a mistake, instead of reprimanding them, Erin was somebody who talked it through and turned it into a lesson and made it something that they all could learn from together. So there was a positive experience with that. Now, because of her great work, Erin actually was promoted fairly quickly, and a new person came in. The new person's name was Stephen. And Stephen was somebody who came in from the outside, and he knew he had big shoes to fill. So Stephen said, I'm going to prove myself. And he, as you can see, wanted to come out, and he wanted to come out strong. So he talked to his team and he said, listen, just like a pro football team, everyone on my team earns their spot every year. So I expect you to work hard and we'll see how we do, but everyone's starting with a clean slate. And he said, he pulled Miguel aside and said, listen, I've heard good things about you, Miguel. I'm counting on you to keep us successful. Now, under Stephen's leadership, things started to change fairly quickly for Miguel. What happened was he was a bit of a micromanager, and he would come up and work, lean over the team and look at what they were doing. And if they were not doing things right, he called it out. And he made sure people were learning, but they were learning by understanding what everybody was doing wrong within the group. Miguel noticed that people stopped putting forward ideas in the team huddles in the morning. They became more quiet and they were really afraid to talk about things if they went wrong. So productivity started to decline, and Miguel's team was already in a little bit of trouble of losing their never fail 5 reputation when COVID hit. And then productivity and Miguel's team were cut in half. One day, Stephen found errors on Miguel's report, and he pulled him aside and asked him, "What is going on with my never fail 5? Is there a mental malfunction happening somewhere? This report looks like totally ADD. I can't understand it. It's all over the place. We need to focus, Miguel." And Miguel walked away, shaking his head, feeling really upset. The reference to mental health just threw him completely. Now, over the last few months, things had started to change for Miguel too. He started to feel lost, and he was losing his focus. He wasn't able to concentrate. He wasn't wanting to eat. He was starting to lose interest in going out with his friends. He started to feel like he was in trouble. Now, because of this, because of the lack of sleep and the not wanting to eat, he started not to feel well, and he started to become late at work. So he was actually late 3 times in the last month. And on the 3rd time, he got a really embarrassing reprimand from Stephen. Now today, Miguel is sitting in the meeting, the monthly meeting, and this is a meeting that he's done 100 times. He's there with the other supervisors, and they're about to go around the room and share with Stephen and with Stephen's boss what the monthly numbers look like. What's the productivity looking like? Now, as he's listening, he's starting to feel different. And the leaders are going around one at a time and sharing their numbers and giving their report. And it's starting to get a little bit closer to Miguel's turn. And Miguel's starting to feel some changes inside of him. He's feeling his heartbeat starting to increase. He's starting to get a little bit of a sweaty feeling. He feels flush, like things are going on, and he's looking like, wondering, do I look totally red right now? What's going on with me? His chest is starting to get heavy, and it's getting a little harder to breathe. And now we're getting closer. There's only another person away who's giving the report. And Miguel cannot fight this overwhelming sense of, I've got to get out of here. I've got to escape. He's starting to feel like he can barely walk. So he leans over to the person next to him and shakily says, "I have to go. I'm not feeling well." And he gets up just before his turn and just rushes out of the room. So he walks out and he's heading out towards the parking garage, but he makes it only to the step when he sits down and just puts his hand in his head and just says, "What is happening to me? This doesn't feel like me. I don't know what's going on." And he's frightened by the extreme feelings that he had inside, not knowing what's going on. And he's sitting there shaking and wondering. And now Stephen has left the meeting as well. And as Stephen left the meeting, he's feeling a little bit differently. He's frustrated because he just got embarrassed in front of his boss. Somebody just walked out of the room right before it was his turn to go. Somebody who's been late to work multiple times, and somebody whose productivity has decreased significantly, and who isn't really forthcoming in meetings anymore and talking or wanting to be kind of volunteering like he used to. And this somebody has actually messed up a few times pretty badly on his report. So Stephen is feeling like, that guy betrayed me. He doesn't have my back. He's not trying anymore. On Monday, he's going to go on a PIP, a performance improvement plan. So I'm going to stop the story here. And I want us to stop and really just keep in mind that as we're dealing with these types of situations, people, human beings who work together every day can be coming from very different places. And we're going to hold on to this story, and you're going to see this story be pulled through as we go through the rest of the presentation. And we're going to come back and visit with Miguel a few times and talk about what happened and what he's going through. But this is about a foundation of expertise for you, setting a foundation of understanding. And so I'm really excited to bring up our next speaker, Ken Duckworth, who's going to bring us through the symptoms of mental illness, but he's also going to raise us to this higher level of thinking about, as leaders, we're setting a foundation of excellence when it comes to mental health. And what are some of the key things we need to think about? So Ken, I'm going to pass it on over to you, and thanks so much.
Thank you, Debbie. I'll be covering a couple of areas in my travels as a psychiatrist and as a person who works kind of thinking about the public health of mental health. I also am the senior medical director for a health plan and another part-time job in addition to working for the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And I've seen employers really step up their game in the mental health and addiction space. So I'll be discussing the prevalence of serious mental illness and mental health conditions generally, symptoms and behavioral impacts, making smart benefit decisions. HR leaders have tremendous impact on how people can or cannot access services, both through benefit decisions and through the culture you help to create. Let's go to the next slide. The best study done of Americans during the pandemic, the usual number used to be 1 in 5 Americans lives with a mental health condition. We're over 2 in 5 now. And these were people who took an online survey, but the surveys they took were the same standardized metrics that you would use in your primary care office that have been universally accepted to be the gold standards for the diagnosis. So anxiety and depression, by far the most common. Trauma-related symptoms, 26%. Obviously, there's racial trauma, there's unemployment, which can be a tremendous stressor for people. 13% increased or started using substances. So that's a lot of relapse. And the people who seriously considered suicide, the numbers are pretty high. These are seriously considering suicide in the previous 30 days. This is substantially higher than baseline. Moral of the story is, the impact of the pandemic, the uncertainty, the grief, the risk of unemployment, co-occurring racial trauma at the same time has left people not in great shape. There hasn't been a study this good. I'd find it hard to believe that with more death and more psychological impacts of the ongoing pandemic that those numbers are better, but they're probably pretty close. Next slide, please, Debbie. Anxiety is a very common symptom. I mean, think about the anxiety in the pandemic. This is actually a normal experience of the perception of threat. So, of course, we are biologically wired to be aware of potential threats on us. And the uncertainty of a little packet of DNA that has unknown and potentially catastrophic impacts is anxiety provoking. These slides will be available to you. You can take a look at this. All of us have felt anxiety. And anxiety symptoms are not an anxiety disorder. To have an anxiety disorder, you really have to have an impact on your functioning. And at the functional impact of anxiety can be profound. One panic attack can make it so that people don't leave the house. Obsessive compulsive disorder can be activated by germ phobias. For example, I've dealt with several patients who've had germ phobias and it's gotten a lot worse. So some anxiety is normal. The idea of enough anxiety to prepare for the exam is what you're looking for. So enough anxiety to wear a mask, figure out how to get your loved ones a vaccine if they're eligible, and enough anxiety to figure out how am I going to get motivated to get my child to learn online, right? You need enough anxiety to stay motivated, but you don't want so much that you're disabled. So this is the whole performance anxiety curve, which I think has been moved left in the context of the pandemic. It has moved left, meaning more people are anxious and more people are having functional symptoms. And typical numbers, are lower than they are during the pandemic. Let's go to the next slide, please. So a co-traveler of anxiety is depression. Many mental health conditions co-occur. I can't say we really understand the underlying biology of this. This is a lot harder than the cardiac system. But the basic idea is that people who have depression, again, an extension of a normal experience. Everyone has had sadness. And if you've suffered a loss of someone you deeply loved, that's a very close experience to what we consider major depression. Difficulty sleeping, negative thinking, feeling sad, crying a lot, hopeless thoughts, and in the case of major depression, thoughts of harming yourself, changes in appetite. And so these symptoms need to last for more than 2 weeks And the idea is under considerable stress, there's a biological pathway. About half of people who have depression have one episode and never have another the rest of their lives. About 50% of people live with a chronic recurrent condition. And so hopefully, depending on how self-aware they are, they're able to recognize their potential risk for a future episode. And if you've had a prior depressive episode and you know that psychotherapy plus medication or psychotherapy plus transcranial magnetic stimulation, I'll get back to that in the benefits. That's an FDA-approved treatment for treatment-resistant depression. So people need to have access to these treatments, and in the design of your benefits, I think it's incumbent upon you to think that through, given how common these problems are, and given how expensive it is to replace employees. You know, presenteeism and absenteeism, the number one cause of those is untreated depression in your workforce. Next slide, please. Psychological trauma. There's a brilliant book by one of my professors called The Body Keeps the Score. And the idea is psychological experiences that are overwhelming or typically threaten one's life. So combat, an airplane crash, sexual violence, are classic examples of overwhelming human experience that engender in many people post-traumatic stress. Is post-traumatic stress a disorder? The VA system argued that this was a normal variant because all humans who are confronted with this have some biological and psychological responses. They overreact, they feel cut off. Nightmares and flashbacks represent undigested movies that vomit out of the brain, but they aren't integrated. Like what you had for dinner or what you did today at one of your Zoom calls is in the ordinary memory banks and is integrated and often forgotten over time. Psychological trauma is different than that. This trauma is unusual in that it is potentially life-threatening, but it's not necessarily life-threatening. And a lot of people who've had trauma in their past have recurrence of trauma with the threat of loss of a job, with grief of the death of a loved one. And so, you know, psychological trauma is just something you need to be mindful of. It's interesting, there are psychotherapies that are specific for trauma. And again, having a robust network in your mental health network when you design benefits is going to be important. Take a look at the next slide. You're all in California, I understand. I wanted to let you know that there was a major lawsuit that was settled a year ago, I guess 2 years ago now. And this is United Behavioral Health, WIT versus United Behavioral Health. And you can read about this, but essentially it appears that the finance department was involved in the development of the medical necessity guidelines. And the Attorney General of California offered a material direction to health plans in California. So what's important about this is to pay attention to what's happening in the interpretation of a law called mental health parity. I'm old enough to have had a practice in Massachusetts where you could have $500 of insurance coverage for mental health visits. And after $500, the patient either had to stop seeing you or pay cash. That doesn't happen anymore since the passage of mental health parity. People used to only have 2 hospitalizations for a year that were covered for addiction or mental health, whereas they could go in and out of the hospital for their diabetes a dozen times. So it was kind of structural discrimination led to mental health parity. This lawsuit and this settlement and the Attorney General of California's response is basically saying we haven't gotten to full parity. I only mention it because it's a landmark California case. And if you Google Attorney General of California directives to health plans, if you're thinking about mental health, you need to know these directives and what health plans have had settlements and what health plans are vowing to do better in terms of access to mental health and addiction services. Next slide, please. One of the things that I've come to learn in working for a health plan, and I never knew this before, I thought benefits were the thing that you figured out if your kid would get her asthma meds covered. That is to say, I was a recipient of a health plan choice. It never occurred to me that the proactive engagement to select the health plan is among the most important decisions you can make. And when you're going to pick a health plan for your employees, we do not live in France or England. Employers direct health insurance. And I've been impressed at the number of different health plans that one company can have because a self-insured large employer selects this benefit but not that benefit, this benefit but not that benefit. And it's really, really not universal coverage. So if you're serious about attending to the mental health or addiction needs of your employees, pay attention to the health plan decisions you're making. Obviously, the cheapest health plan will have an advantage on the bottom line, but it's likely not to have a robust, it's at risk, let's put it this way, of not having robust mental health coverage. Have you taken a look at the copays that you've set? I was in a meeting once, and a woman from a world famous hospital here in Boston came up to me and said, I can't believe that Blue Cross charges $50 for Narcan. And I said, you work at the most famous hospital in America, actually. You're a gigantic employer group. You could make the copay zero. You know that, right? That is to say, a self-insured employer group, they pick all these benefits. So for the fully insured, these are the small businesses. You know, I made the copay for Narcan reversing overdose zero in about a week. And I've been impressed that not every self-insured employer does that. I eliminated the copay and the deductible for methadone for all the fully insured people at no charge to the self-insureds. I had several accounts say, quote, we don't have people like that in our employment, you know. And what I would say is if you're employing humans, some of them are going to have mental health, some of them are going to have addiction, some of them are going to have opiate addiction. And so the other question I challenge you on is, you know, are you really looking at the best plan or the cheapest plan? Because there is a direct correlation in terms of the robustness of the mental health and addiction network. Let's take a look at the next slide. Organizational culture makes a difference in how people experience this. At our company, at Blue Cross, we made sick days wellness days. And what this means is people are allowed to take a mental health day, part of their sick days. It's fairly radical, and it may not last after the pandemic, but it's a recognition. People under a lot of stress, a lot of uncertainty. Young parents are trying to do things that are Herculean. But that was a decision that was made. I don't have data on how much that was used, but that was extremely well received. Influenced by leader behavior. Leaders who show any vulnerability at all and an acknowledgement of, say, a family history of mental health or addiction concerns make it easier for people to seek help. I'll give a quick example. I wanted to run an event for people who were in recovery from mental health and addiction conditions. And the first answer I got 5 years ago was, we don't do that. We're a big corporation. That's really quite risky. And I said, okay, you're not ready for it. I think it would be pretty cool because we're a leading health plan on mental health and addiction. And then about 3 years after that, someone came up to me from a disability employee resource group and said, hey, Ken, I heard you wanted to do this thing. Well, we're ready too, and we actually have the people. I didn't have to find anybody. So this event was attended by, I'm going to say 500 people. It was for people sharing their vulnerabilities and their recoveries. And it was led by the CEO. As the house shrink, I moderated the event. And it was quite beautiful because not only were the employees there, the employees' supervisors and colleagues were there. And the next day, I got about 5 emails, which went something like this. Dear Ken, thank you for putting this event together. I've been in recovery from alcohol or bipolar disorder or obsessive compulsive disorder or opiates. If you have 3,000 employees, people have these problems in your employment. And they said to me, and last night was the first time I ever felt I belonged here. So, you know, culture matters. And I think we have extremely low turnover. Very few people leave. I think people feel supported. And I think that's a lot to do with culture. So creating the conditions where it's okay to ask for help. I run a mental health chat for people. And, not every organization has a psychiatrist who likes to talk to people. At the beginning of the pandemic, I thought it might be good for us to chat every other week. For the 6 weeks or so, we all thought we were going to need to stay inside to bend the curve. Well, this still has a cult following. I have between 400 and 600 people attend every other week. All we do is have conversations about creativity, resilience, and acknowledgement of how to get help for mental health or addiction concerns. So it's been a great place to work for me, and I would say that that's a case study in how organizational culture actually makes a tremendous difference. Next slide. I'm going to take some questions now from you through Debbie, right? Debbie, I'm not going to do the quiz, right? I'm going to do Q&A. You're going to do the quiz.
Exactly.
I hopefully would be able to pass a quiz on mental health.
Absolutely. So we do want to make sure that everybody has a chance to ask questions. I mean, it's a great opportunity to have Ken with us. And if you have questions about any of the diagnosis that were described, the behaviors or symptoms, anything that you'd like to chat about with him for a few minutes, we would love to open it up and welcome the questions. And Shannon, I might ask if you don't, well, let's see, hold on. There we go.
Do you see the one question? I can ask you, Ken, if you, there was one question to just clarify if you had used a stat that 50% of people have chronic depression. If you could just clarify what that
Of the people who've had a major depressive episode, so that's 2 weeks of sadness plus 5 of the following 8 symptoms: sleep, hopeless thinking, a lack of appetite, loss of interest in and pleasurable activities. Like if I'm not watching March Madness, I'm not saying I have clinical depression, but that's an area that I really love. I run a family pool. If I'm like whatever, college basketball, that's note that. That's loss of interest. Suicidal thoughts, change in appetite, change in sleep. These are common symptoms of major depression. Having them for 1 day is not an episode of major depression, but having them for 2 weeks plus functional impairment. You can't parent or work. So if you've had a major depressive episode, 1/2 of people will have the one episode and will not have another in their lifetime. And we don't know what separates them from the people who have a depressive episode and then have recurrent vulnerabilities to future episodes. That is to say, we don't understand it well enough. But you can't really reassure people that they'll never have another episode, because the truth is the only way you can find out is by watching the movie, right? It's not a snapshot question, but it's a good question. And if I wasn't clear, I apologize. 1/2 of all people who have a true clinical major depression never have another episode, and 1/2 have a recurrent vulnerability. So when they have a loss, a divorce, a job loss, they're at risk of a recurrence.
Thank you. Another question that came up, Dr. Duckworth, is could you speak to the rapidly increasing technologies that are available to help employees and what employers can do to facilitate their usage?
Yeah, it's a good question. So there's a dozen or so companies that are using kind of a support cognitive behavioral coaching model. You probably know all the names of them. I don't think any of them have a particular intellectual capital that's unique, but I think the idea that you provide people with a support to get an awareness of your thinking, of how you're thinking about your stress. So, if I don't give a good talk, I could say, it wasn't a great night. I'm tired, a long day. I have a puppy. It just didn't go that well for Debbie. And, you're going to win some, you're going to lose some. Automatic negative thoughts, which almost all these technology engagements have, would say, well, let's challenge that automatic thinking that would say, this talk didn't go well. I know I did it as a good deed. I'm obviously a failure. I'm clearly not doing that well as an educator, as a psychiatrist. I wonder if I should reevaluate my entire career. Maybe I'll just quit tomorrow because I'm a failure. So that's automatic negative thinking. And almost all these many wellness related apps, engagement strategies, or tech interventions involve you critically examining your thoughts. So it's not cognitive behavior therapy because there is no therapist, but it's a series of approaches to how you think about stress and how you approach your own self-care. It's a good question because demand is crushing supply given the increased prevalence of mental health. Some use of these kind of creative interventions is probably well placed. It's not going to help a person with bipolar disorder and trauma, but it will help a stressed out person who's a bit anxious. And if you can take those people off the numerator of people seeking help divided by people providing help, you're doing something nice for people. Also, pay attention to your employee assistance plan. If only 2% of people are using it, you really might want to rethink that. Numbers tend to be low. And when I talk to employees, they don't trust that it's actually confidential. So I only mention that because some of these cognitive coaching apps don't give any feedback to the health plan or the employer. They give you a code and you do it on your own. Those seem to have better engagement numbers.
Very good. Thank you so much. There's also a comment, just seeing if you have any thoughts on this. If you might have an example, and I put this out really to any one of our panelists, an example of a success story where you've been able to convince managers or someone has to suspend looking only at behavior from a performance issue to considering that larger picture, including potential mental health concerns. Many times, perhaps, you might hear from a manager, yes, we'll do that. But then when bringing up mental health concerns to managers, they still may be convinced that it's truly a poor performance issue. That's not a mental health issue.
Well, this is why, you're all HR professionals, right? Because it seems to me your primary concern is performance. And then what Debbie's getting at is, have you created the conditions where they can share a potential risk in this area with you, that you could help them, for instance, get an accommodation. People with bipolar disorder should not work night jobs. They should not be traveling east and west internationally. You get jet lag, they're likely to have a manic episode. That's on a reasonable accommodation. You say, I can do the job, but actually I can't do it between midnight and 8 a.m. And you'd say, we would never ask anyone to work between midnight and 8 a.m., except when you do, right? So the idea is, if they say I have a vulnerability, and the ADA requires, reasonable accommodation, you still have to be able to do the job. So, I'd leave it to your colleagues, to how you deal with the nuance between performance and mental health. I think it's Venn diagrams that commonly overlap. And I think, in a context of culture, have you created a condition where the person might even consider figuring out what the resources are to help them do that? So
Yeah.
it's a challenging area. I freely admit that. And that's why I'm glad I'm a psychiatrist and not an HR professional.
Well, and to that point, there was another question. What is a good strategy to really help overcome those concerns about confidentiality with EAP within an organization?
Yeah, well, you have 153 people in the HR world on this conversation. I would ask your colleagues. I'm not an expert on EAPs. I simply observe that they're underutilized, and profoundly so. And when I ask people about that, they say it's because people don't trust it. Maybe there's other reasons, but it does seem to me that this is a resource for financial issues, elder care issues, transportation issues. Somehow people don't want to access that, which is surprising because these are common concerns among people. So maybe, in the chat function or in your off hours, back in the day, over the coffee clutch, at the break, you do it virtually, of course, now in the pandemic. What's the best EAP model? What are the ways to engage people? Are you abandoning the idea of EAP and offering something different for people? I think these are the kind of questions that I'd be asking, because the numbers that I see on EAPs are so very low, they're almost not worth having. And then the question, at least in my experience, now I'm pontificating as if I know something about HR. I don't. I want to make it really clear. I know a lot about how to treat panic disorder. I know a lot about how to treat bipolar disorder. But this is just my impression from hanging out in organizations. People don't think their EAP is safe. And once you don't have safety, you don't have anything.
And we do have a HR legal expert with us in session 2, who's going to go a lot more deeply into privacy and
Finally, someone
right.
who can give you a straight answer.
So we will have those answers,
Yeah.
and we're excited to share with you. And we're so grateful, Dr. Duckworth. I think we have about 4 minutes left in your segment, and I thought it would be wonderful to have you leave us with, we know that the prevalence of mental health challenges with our youth and young adults is dramatically more than our average adult prevalence. And I'm thinking from an HR leader's perspective, is there anything that you would recommend to them, saying, we know that we're having this influx of younger people coming into the workplace with
Yeah.
mental health challenges? Any advice of things they might want to think about or how they could get ahead a little bit in just a couple minutes or a couple?
Well, first of all, let's go over the facts. Young people have more mental health concerns than the generation prior. Is that because they're more open? Is that because there is a culture that it's acceptable to talk about it? Is that because cool people, BB Rexa, Noah Centineo, Selena Gomez, all came to NAMI this year and said, we want to talk to our millions of fans about our mental health challenges? This is game changing. That didn't exist 20 years ago or 40 years ago. So the first thing is there's definitely a higher prevalence if you look at the numbers of anxiety and depression. The second is they're much more open about it. This demographic change is going to change your work because people are going to both have more challenges in this space and they're going to be more open about them, right? And the third thing is in the pandemic, this hits young people at their developmental stage right on the nose. So I'm 60. I'm supposed to be watching Netflix and chilling with my wife. What do you know? That's what I'm doing in the pandemic. I have a job. I tried to do some good on this earth. I have kids. They're in med school, blah, blah, blah. I'm not suffering any demographic hits. Now, if I was 75 and single and alone, I'd again be very challenged by an isolated pandemic. People who are in their teen years, their college years, the young adult years, these people need to be out. They need to be exploring. They need to be having the music of social interaction, of getting along with people, of learning how to stand up to somebody who's giving them a hard time, small b bullying, like all the social interactions. So the answer is, first of all, it's worse than it used to be. They're more open than it used to be. And the pandemic is an intergenerational transfer of heartache, in my opinion, where people in their 70s and 80s are being preserved by people in their teens and 20s suffering developmental hits. So, I look at the United States Senate, and I'm glad they're considering actually doing something for children in terms of the budget, because kids are the ones paying the price for the isolation on the mental health and addiction side. It's very straightforward. So it's impacting everybody the same. It's not. People of color, essential workers, caregivers that are unpaid, and young adults and teenagers are having the worst impact. So that's a big statement, but you need to know where the mountain is before you can even think about it. This generation is going to be more open to getting therapy. You'd be wise not to have a skinny mental health network. This generation is going to be more open to these kind of creative online interventions that we briefly touched upon earlier. They're going to want to have a culture where the leaders support people in talking about this stuff. So, that's the generation that's coming. They're fantastic in so many ways. If you're ever tempted to complain about teenagers and young adults, remember that this pandemic has hit them right on the nose. And it hasn't really done so for people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, unless you have young kids, in which case you're having it, or if you have elderly parents who are highly vulnerable, at risk of dying of this illness. So it really depends on the developmental stage, and I think you should actively meditate on how you would evolve an organizational culture if you're in your job for a decade, that it's going to be different as we go down the road. So long answer. There are no short answers with complex questions, but those are my answers.
Thank you so much. So much. We really appreciate that.
All right,
And-
Debbie, thanks for having me.
All
Take
right.
care, everybody.
all right. Have a wonderful evening.
You too. Bye-bye.
And Kevin, I think you might have wanted to share something.
Yeah, hey Deb, thanks. You know, just listening to the doctor and reflecting on the question. I love what he was talking about with culture. One of the things that's come out loud and clear in our research is, you know, we all know that, you know, the what and the how of leadership plays such a role. So the what is the performance, right? What gets done, what results, the outcomes that get produced. It's the how of leadership that has really changed. And that's what makes the big difference. I can't help but think, getting back to the question at hand, which is, you know, has the organization, we've done tremendous research on what it takes to successfully change. We call it renovate a culture. And one of the absolute key essential steps in it is having crystal clear clarity on the leadership behavior changes required to support that culture. And I reflect on a company like a MasterCard where, you know, at their core of their business is what they call DQ. It's their decency quotient. And basically what they're saying is we're about business results, but when we make decisions, when our leaders react, how we lead, it's got decency at the core, and we make it very, very clear what that means. It's reinforced through all the programs of talent attraction, retention, development, rewards, you name it. And I would go back and look at that. That's what that speaks to from my vantage point.
And that so perfectly sets us up for the next pieces that we're going to talk about, really, which is really being mindful of the environment that we're creating with each other, right? And so MasterCard did an amazing job of starting to ensure that there's an expectation that's built in at the cultural level of that good quality existing when people come together to accomplish work. So great. I'm going to continue rolling in, and we'll go through and get into that a little bit more and think about the psychological safety aspect. And I'm going to start by having you all answer a quick question for me. Let's see if you can remember. When we left Miguel, he was in distress. He had just had a extremely difficult and challenging panic attack, something that was really earth-shattering to him. And we noticed that he was in a polar opposite place of Stephen. And Stephen had some very different feelings. What do you remember? And put this up in chat, just fire off some words. How was Stephen thinking about Miguel in this moment when he was leaving that room and going back to his office? What types of things was he thinking about Miguel? And maybe Shannon, you can read off a couple things that you're seeing in there.
Yeah, it's blowing up. I'll try. Unreliable, betrayed, angry and embarrassed that he failed him and didn't have his back, disappointed, angry, frustrated, negative, he failed.
Right.
He thought Miguel was a lost cause and a non-performer.
He was. And we know that there's something that was very different, and the truth was a very different experience that was happening out there. So what we saw was that Stephen was looking at Miguel, and he was seeing this. He was seeing the common signs of disengagement, rudeness. Miguel, he thought he was rude. He got up and stormed off. He wasn't really engaging during the job. He was absent. He was late. He started to withdraw. So all those things, that apathy, all those things that we're trained when we learn about employee engagement, we are triggered to say, oh, this person is not engaged. And my goal is to have engaged employees. So my first instinct is to take action. And that action is, I think I need to manage, right? So I want to start managing, and I'm going to manage Miguel. And in Stephen's case, he's going right for that performance improvement plan. He's going right into it. And then we look at the truth and look at those symptoms. These are the symptoms that Dr. Duckworth shared with us. When we look at depression, Changes in sleep. So I'm tired. I have low energy. I'm not able to concentrate. I'm not able to be as productive as I was in the past. I feel negative. I might feel hopeless, which could come across as a little bit apathetic. I have physical aches and pains, which could also prevent me from getting out of bed in time and from getting to work on time. And then with that panic attack, that kind of culmination of all that anxiety, being tense or jumpy and having to jump up and leave the room. Or if I'm on a shift, having to leave my desk every now and then because I'm in the throes of a panic attack and I need to get to somewhere quiet where I can get my head back, where I can get control back. We need to understand as leaders that we have a responsibility to just be mindful and knowledgeable, have that foundation of knowledge and the wherewithal to pause to think, what am I experiencing here? Am I really having someone who used to be a top performer who's turning into someone who's disengaged? Or am I having someone that I work with who is having a mental health challenge? And that's one of the big goals of this session, is that we all realize that we need to be able to be mindful like that. And when we have someone coming into our presence who's having mental health challenges, what they need is not to be managed. What they need, they're coming in, and speaking from personal experience as well as all the work, I'm a big volunteer. I do a lot of work with NAMI. I'm trained by them. Speaking from the experience of this, what someone needs coming to the table is validation. People feel like no one believes you when you have a mental health challenge. And if you need to adjust anything at work because of that, they feel like you're going to feel like, oh, they're just lazy. They're just trying to get out of work. So what you need is validation and support. And as I say that, what I want to make sure that everyone on this call knows is that as we talk about that ability for a manager to recognize a mental health challenge, we are not saying that you have to add therapists to your role. Your job is not to be someone who's coming in to fix everything. Your job is to be able to recognize and play a role in their support, connect them to resources, make sure they're getting what they need, and create a safe environment. So recognition does not equal diagnosis. And we want to make sure that's something that is loud and clear for all of you. That's, we are looking at this as an opportunity to equip you to create an environment where people have hope and they feel like they can come forward for change and to have help. So recognition equals consideration. It equals that pause. Am I going to wonder going forward if this is the case? It also equals being able to ask the right questions, because we would never want to come at somebody and say, Miguel, I think you're depressed. I think you have anxiety. That's just not the approach we'd want to take. So we want to ask questions the right way to create that door that's open for someone to come through and ask for help. And validation, we want to make sure, again, like I said, that we are acknowledging that it's a condition. We know this is something that's a challenge. And then we need to be really good with how we respond and make sure that that response includes follow through. Now, these are all really rich topics for discussion, and we're so excited to be with you on April 28th and to give you each one of these steps. But the truth of the matter is, what we're doing today is so important because nobody is going to come to you to ask for help unless you've created an environment that is safe. So anyone who has a mental health challenge and they are going into work, they're trying to figure out, how am I going to get by here? And their first question before they will ask anything or look for support or allow you to do anything that's positive is, am I safe with you? And that's where we're going to go now. We're going to talk more deeply about psychological safety and make sure that we all understand the important role that we play and the difference we can make in setting up that safe environment. So I'm going to start by going back, and I want to be very basic in this thought because I think if the beauty of what we're talking about tonight is there's a lot of simplicity here and a lot of goodness that can come from some very simple facts. And one of them is the way we think about ourselves as a group at work. And the truth is that we are human beings that are coming together around a common goal with common interests, things that we all believe in, things that we're striving towards, and it makes us a community. And a work community is both a community at a macro level, meaning our organization is a community that we all want to belong to and fit in. And within that broader community are micro communities, which are our teams. And it's even more important that we feel that sense of belonging and inclusion in a team. But we have to ask ourselves, so why do we care? Why do we care if we fit in or belong or feel safe on a team? And to answer that, we actually have to go back to our ancient brains. And we look at ourselves as we were first evolving as mankind, and look at ourselves in those days and realize that if we did not have a sense of community, we didn't have security. We didn't have food. We didn't have shelter. We didn't have the things that we needed in order to survive. So in those days, hardwired into our brain was this realization that if we didn't belong to a community, we may not live. And that fact, that kind of little bit of information has stayed hardwired in our brains all the way through our evolution. And what happens is when we are feeling like we don't belong or we're being pushed out or excluded from a community, it triggers our amygdala. And our amygdala releases a stress hormone called cortisol. And what that does is it really affects what the brain's doing, all that great work that's happening. And you and I in our everyday lives, we are focusing in and we have the ability to think and to wonder and to innovate and to process. And that's all happening up in our frontal lobes. And when we feel like we're being excluded or threatened our sense of belonging in a community, we actually have all that energy go right back, and it becomes that battle of fear. I'm going to make sure that I'm safe. I'm going to make sure that I'm secure. And all my energy is going to resolving that question that's going on in my mind of, do I belong? Do I fit in? And what we know is that our brains have developed incredibly over time. But the truth is that all of us are looking for belonging cues as we enter communities, as we enter work groups. So our brains are constantly scanning for these things. And I'm going to pause for a quick second and just do a quick check, Shannon, if we have any questions I can answer right now. And otherwise, I want to go right in, dive into
Keep
those
going.
belonging cues. Okay, awesome. So what are the belonging cues that our brains are really looking for? And as I look through this, one of the books that I thought did such a great job of defining in a really simple and straightforward way the belonging cues was Daniel Coyle's The Culture Code. And I'm just going to share some of the way he positioned it so that you can have that. It's a great book. I highly recommend it. The first one that he talks about is proximity. And he's talking about the fact that we are within a group, we have a sense that we are physically able to connect or be together. And I'm going to touch on why be together is an important way that we're using those words. And eye contact, something that's very basic and simple, but that is how we are receiving many of our signals. So eye contact is really critical as we're looking out and making sure that we're belonging with our group. Mimicry is a very interesting concept. So what mimicry means is that I have the ability to look around me and see what other people are doing and know that that's how someone succeeds. That's how someone is included here. So for us in the corporate world, mimicry can play a very powerful role in our organizational values and our competencies set us up to make sure that we're creating an opportunity to mimic, right? So we're creating that opportunity to show people what great work looks like. So mimicry plays a very important role as we think about the work we can do in human resources to make sure that we're doing a better job of creating and showing people what good looks like and how we get together and fit in. And body language as well. As we even looked at Stephen's picture when he was first coming on board, he was standing there with his arms crossed, and that was his way of saying, I am large and in charge and I'm not open, I'm shut out. And we all have heard that many times. So I'm not going to dwell on it, but it plays a key role when we think about making sure people feel included. And vocal pitch is key as well. I'm just think about listening to people in meetings, and you can immediately tell somebody who's disengaged or not wanting to be there because you'll listen to other people follow each other's pitch, and then you'll see that one person in the corner who's kind of quiet and acting disinterested. Vocal pitch is a big message sender for us. And attention. In our ancient days, that meant that I was part of the team, that I was able to go out and help to be one that if they needed something to go gather or go help with hunting, I was brought into that and I was given that attention. And I was also given that sense of value, meaning I'm included and they need me there because they get some value from the inclusion of me in that hunt or that gathering effort. So all of those things come together. And I'm often asked in today's virtual world, can we do that? Like, can we create belonging cues and can we actually make people feel good about things? And part of the work I do for the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and I want to share with you, the answer is yes, because we do every week when COVID hit, that we needed to create support groups for people. And we had support groups that were running around our state. And one of the things we did is we moved to a virtual format. And I actually helped to open up one of the first statewide virtual support groups for NAMI. And we do things to make sure that people feel like they can open up and feel connected and supported by people. And that are tricks of making sure that we have a framework that we work within. So we know what is correct. We set up mimicry because we create principles for our meetings and we create a framework. We create a feeling of proximity because we keep our cameras on and we allow for that eye contact and we can see our body language. We give virtual hugs if somebody's having a really tough time. And we know that we can create belonging together because we know we're making a difference with people who are coming to us with some really, really difficult challenges. So I challenge people when they say, oh, we're virtual, so we can't create a sense of belonging. The truth is we can communicate caring as long as we are proactive and put an effort in. And when people feel that they're the recipient of the caring, it immediately does help to impact those brain chemicals. And we start to get more of a release of serotonin when I really either observe or am the recipient of caring. So the answer is yes, we can definitely create belonging cues in this virtual world. And I want to say it's really, really important when it comes to people who are struggling with their mental health. And what you're looking at here is one of the questions that we did when we did our study. We called it an Inspired Human Connection study with Qualtrics in it, was about exclusion behaviors. And what you're looking at in this data is the blue bar is telling you what everybody was feeling and how they responded to questions about it's a level of agreement with, have I been experiencing times when I wasn't given a meaningful role and I was excluded that way? Or was I being mocked by a manager or being mocked by a peer? And the orange line are people who self-identified with a mental health challenge. So what this tells us is people with mental health challenges are feeling like they are being excluded more. So whether or not it's true, there's a perception of that. And so as we think about how we're creating belonging cues in a safe space for people, we want to make sure that we're doing it because all those many people who are coming in right now with all those statistics that were shared, they need to know. So you may feel like, I don't have to tell someone they belong. They know. The truth is in today's world, you have to articulate belonging. You have to start to say it because people are looking, they're scanning for the risks to see, do I not belong? And that's something that we can all do every day to start to make a difference in the climate and the culture within our teams. So I'm going to bring us to, because we know that belonging cues are really important, but it's not everything. Think about people that you've seen who are super good at giving belonging cues. They might be great eye contact, really good vocal connection. They're open, they're huggy, they're so warm. But then when you're in a meeting with them and some people leave the room, they shut the door and start telling you everything that's wrong with those people. And so they're great at showing belonging cues, but they're not so great at really building belonging. And so we need to make sure that as we think about this, we think about that broader picture. It's the space between people and what are we creating within that space. And we look at psychological safety as it's a condition, and it is a condition that is earned over time by repeated demonstrations of support, trust, respect, really that you've had their back over and over, because beliefs don't change until experiences change. So we want to make sure that we think about this idea of us creating a safe space as being people who are creating that opportunity to connect, and we're doing it really well, but we have to keep doing it frequently because we give people an effort and we see that belonging light turn on, right? So we are reaching out, we're connecting, we're asking questions, we're making people feel good. But if we don't keep that energy going, the light is going to go out. So we know we can do a great job, we can make people feel connected, but if we are not keeping that energy going through, that light bulb is not going to stay lit. So there's things we can do as leaders to make sure that we're creating this ongoing experience of trust and goodness and empowerment and permission to go out and try things. So I'm gonna come into the psychological safety piece, and I want to just bring you to a space because I keep talking about this, what's happening when people come together to accomplish work. And what we've seen is that when people are in a psychologically safe space at work, there's a certain kind of environment where these things are okay for me, right? So it's okay for me to come in and be myself. I can ask questions and be curious without fear of someone going, why are you asking that? It's not, you shouldn't even be worrying about that. I can be that challenger. I can ask questions if someone's presenting something and say, why does that make sense? I can be that innovative person. I can also be the one that they put forward. I can be the one that they say, you know what, we believe in you, we trust you, we want you to represent our group. That is definitely a psychologically safe place. And then the other side of the coin is that when I'm not doing so great, I'm in a good place too, which means it's okay for me to ask for help. It's okay for me to be vulnerable and say, I don't know the answer to that question. I don't understand. I can be wrong. And that's where that lesson of failure becomes really important. And then I can also be facing a personal challenge so that I would know if I'm Miguel coming into a space like this. And that's actually the space that Aaron had created, his first boss. He knew it was okay for him to not be okay because Erin did so many of those things. She actually was pulling in people and allowing people to be curious. And when somebody failed, she made it a lesson and it was a positive lesson, right? Very, very different than what Stephen experienced. So people will say, well, how do I do that? How do I start to create that warm experience? I've always been really process oriented. Like my job, I've got deadlines, I've got stuff to do. This nice stuff is nice, but I don't have time for it. But the truth is, no matter where you are with the way that you've been managing, simple shifts in actually just starting to do these things yourself can make a very positive difference. So for example, if I've been so busy, there's no way I'm bringing an expert in to talk to me about anything new. I know what I've got to do, I get it done. If I show my team, I'm curious and I want to learn and I want to ask questions, you're going to start to build that belief. If you yourself admit that you've been wrong, that you've done something wrong, or you don't have the answers, and so many of us want to hide from that. When we're managers, we have to know it. We don't have to know it. We just have to show people that it's smart to go and look for the right answer. So I just want to say, if you want to start building that space, just start building it. That's the simplicity of what we're talking about today, is to start taking action. And then I wanted to share, Kevin has got some great data that his company did. And because we wanted to give you some more tangible elements to kind of lead with sort of activities and actions you can take. So Kevin, I'm going to just, either I can push for you or I'll let you just go ahead and take the screen and share some of the things that you guys have been learning.
Oh, good, Debbie. I'll tell you, if you could push for me, that'd be best.
Yeah, happy to.
Here, if you don't mind. So thanks. I just wanted to share some of the practical findings, and I had referenced earlier when I was introducing myself about next practices. Next practices are practices, and we find a few in each of the studies that we do. These are ones that have relatively low adoption rates. So typically it's less than 20% of a data sample that we study that actually implements this practice. But what we know, running our correlation analysis against our dependent variables, is that it has a very strong relationship, positive relationship to our market performance index, how a company performs over time, but also to, in this case, these are the other indices that we correlated against were around the level of workforce well-being reported at an organization. And so what we found in our work that we did with Professor Cross, and it was validated over the summer with additional longitudinal research we did with World at Work, is that some next practices would be where leaders are taking time and scheduling time for themselves. And that could be time for meditation, could be a 5-minute time break. It can be what author David Pink calls a nappuccino, where, every day he's taking 20 minutes, downs a cup of coffee, takes a 20-minute nap and refreshes, and he's recharged and being creative again That's an example of it. What we're talking about here is someone who's modeling what it is for the workforce so they know it's okay and it's expected and it's actually built in to the practices like walking meetings or standing up at a desk and while you're having visual or just walking around the house, a good example of that. Making it safe, and the doctor shared this, and Deb, you referenced it too, but really making it safe for employees to speak up. What does that look like, making it safe? Yes, someone had referenced during this, like a warm line. I know that, I think it's Intel has a warm line where people can call up and it's anonymous, but they're speaking to trained people who, make sure that the concerns are expressed and it's brought into a queue to make sure that there's remediation that's happening without divulging personally identifiable information in that regard. And then training leaders. And it's interesting, going back to this very small data set we had, the sample with this, with the LA and OC County NHRA chapters, where 13% indicated that their companies were training leaders. This is a great area of opportunity. That's not far off from what we saw in our research or general stats, but what we can tell you is it makes a big difference. And I'll give you an example. I was talking to two chief HR officers over the summer, was managing a call with several on them, but they were on it talking about that they had just brought in experts to work with their managers, and they were working with them on things like, hey, and this gets back to what the doctor had mentioned. If people who are typically always on time for meetings and never miss a meeting, but you're seeing them absent going forward, that's a pretty good indicator that they're suffering through some type of situation. And, here's how to approach that with that individual. If you could click once on just on this slide here, Debbie, I wanted to give people a fair warning. This is really important. This has all kinds of negative correlation to the overall health of the workforce, as well as to market performance. But the research made very clear it's when leaders have this always on type of attitude. In other words, someone's taking PTO, but they expect them to be available via email. Or when a leader sends an email in the evening and always expects an immediate return, not the occasional one. We all have that, and that's fine. But when they always expect immediacy in returns, everything's urgent, that has a demonstrably negative impact. And then what I wanted to show in the next slide, Deb, is practices that stood out from our research with Rob Cross. Now, Rob Cross is the one who is in Harvard Business Review talking about collaboration overload. And we've done significant studies with him. These are very specific practices that you can put in place as leaders that will help defray people from feeling burdened by so many collaboration requests and feeling that sense of just worn out from always making themselves accessible. First off, just like with making it safe to report, hey, I'm not feeling great here. I'm feeling stress, anxiety, whatever. The same thing is about overburdened collaborative requests, about being able to go to the manager and saying, I've got 14 what are perceived as number one priorities right now. I need you to help me figure out which ones really are. And where there are multiple priorities, it's making it safe to be able to shift work without penalty, to be able to say, hey, you know what? There's a great opportunity for someone on the team from a development standpoint who is not overworked right now. And this would be great for them, good for you, permission to shift work in that regard. Next. If you can click through all of these, I could talk to them very quickly, Deb. Structuring work based on expertise and goals. And what this means is, and this really helps with the diversity and inclusion piece too, which is what is the business or customer need at hand when we're putting together a collaborative team? Who can we pull into that team that has particular expertise where we value that perspective, the background or experience is really needed versus just saying, this is my A team and they're on it again. That provides a lot of burden as not just for that team, but for those that are never selected as well. Leveraging formal and informal roles. So many companies right now, this is like IBM, they denoted these I'll just call them collaboration coaches, who were coached and trained and certified around Agile when IBM was scaling out its Agile methodology across its teams. And these people would sit in meetings and they would just observe, but they would also have the freedom to jump in and say, hey, we're not going to do this, or hey, remember, Jane over here has decision rights authority for this meeting, so Jane will be making the decision. Or hey, Julio, not every answer needs to be answered by you. You've got great opinion, but we need to step back and allow others to allow in. This is where people coming in, allowing them to say, hey, we're not going to let work snap back to the way it was. Let's intervene and show you how work is different now and how it looks healthier in a collaborative environment. And then the last one really speaks to what I just talked about too. If there's one more bullet there, if there's not, I'll just mention it, which is providing space and time to collaborate and reflect. Remember, going back to the meditation, going back to the reflective time, this is like 3M that put this in place before Google's 20%. 3M 75 years ago put in place what they called 15% work time, which is time for certain roles to not work. It's time to think. It's time for them to just do things that they enjoy, because it gets the creative juices going. It gets them ideating more on real critical things that matter a lot. And so these are just certain tips and techniques that reduce overload and really drive for a more healthy environment, Deb.
Perfect, Kevin. Thank you so much. And it's great to have these kinds of more specific, what can I start to do, right? How can I start to take some action and start to build that foundation? And I'm bringing up a slide now, just kind of stepping off and going into sort of those specific, a little bit more specific actions we can take is thinking about our language, so if we're granting, as Kevin was saying, we're granting permission to say what I need and when I need a shift or what I need to change. One of the things we also have to do is sort of own our own ability to create safety from the way that we're choosing our language. And what we want to make sure that we're doing is that we're being mindful about mentally healthy language. Now, I know there's a lot of talk today about saying things the right way, but these simple shifts can be very meaningful for people. So I just want to, again, just fill us with that foundation of understanding and open ourselves up to thinking twice before we throw out some comments. Remember Miguel. So he's been treated all his life for mental illness since he was a teenager. He was given the idea of that is something that needs to be hidden by his mom in the car ride home. Stigma was immediately applied to mental illness. So many people experience that as they come to the table. And then he listened as Stephen, his boss, was calling people ADD and saying that they're not focused and asking if there was a mental malfunction. People are so sensitive to that. So we want to make sure that even in times when things are feeling like they're out of control, that we're not saying this is insane, that person is crazy, or even applying a condition to the person's being. Like, so for example, this idea that she's depressed, right? That implies that is her whole being. And when we talk about somebody and say, oh, they are being treated for depression, or they have depression, they are experiencing depression, it puts a different connotation to it. The other thing that was a big aha when I first started my training with the National Alliance on Mental Illness was how we talk about suicide. And many of us, including myself, when we talked about that sad, horrible occurrence, that tragedy, we would talk about that and use the word they committed suicide. And we know that word committed is very much tied to people who have done something bad, right? They've committed a crime, they've gone to jail. So altering the way we talk about that and really using language like he died by suicide changes the whole tenor of the conversation. So again, some simple shifts that we can start to take, and it's things we can start today to start to change the way people might feel around mental illness and keep, again, opening that door to people to give them a sense of safety around that conversation. So I want to do a quick quiz with you, and I'm going to bring you back a little bit to some of those belonging cues. And what I'd like you to do is just in your chat, throw up the letter that you think corresponds to the correct answer. So which of the following is not a belonging cue? A, proximity, B, attention, C, exclusion, D, vocal pitch. And Shannon, I'm going to ask you to give me a sense of how did people do?
Okay, we have C as the absolute answer.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. That's great. All right. Thanks, guys. Absolutely. It's C. And that was just a quick little check-in to make sure that we're kind of feeling and we're still on the same page. And then let's do this one. True or false? And again, just throw it in your chat. It is important that managers are equipped to diagnose mental illness in their employees so they can recommend viable accommodations. Is that true or false?
We actually have half and half.
That's a trick. It's a little tricky one.
Yes, more are saying false. We have a few truths in there though.
All right. All right.
False is the majority.
So the answer is false. And that is something that I really want to make sure everybody understands, is that when faced with someone who is expressing certain behaviors that are not they're normal or have progressed to some negative behaviors that you're perceiving and starting to wonder about, which is a good thing, it is not your job or your responsibility to diagnose. We are not therapists. And that's something as a support group, facilitator, I often was challenged with this fact of, if somebody was coming to me in need, I want to fix it and I want to tell them all the things that I know are the right things for them to do, and we're going to make a difference. But the truth is that we're not therapists. We are not educated in that for the most part to a point where we can give a diagnosis. All we are is the creator of a safe space and the connector to resources and the support provider, right? So that is a false answer. And we want to make sure that even though we're showing you the symptoms and we're asking you to go out and recognize and think about it, think twice about it, we're not asking you to diagnose or say, this is the right accommodation for this person. Okay, that would be something that HR would help with, that the person's therapist would help with. It would be a group effort. And we're going to dive in a lot more deeply to that in our next session as well. Okay, I'm going to keep going forward. And unless, Shannon, are there any other questions that I can pause and address?
No,
Right?
you're good. You're
All
good.
right, fantastic. As we look at the framework, we just went through psychological safety and creating that safe space. Another big piece, important piece of our framework as we think about that safe space is the context that we create around failure. And as you saw, the stark differences with Miguel's story, Erin, every time somebody did something wrong, they failed, something didn't go well, she created a learning opportunity. Miguel ended up reprimanding, embarrassing, and calling people out, which was his way to make people afraid to come forward. The way we talk about failure is extremely important. And that applies especially with people who are struggling with mental health challenges. And I'm just going to give you a real world example. So in my experience, somebody with OCD had a simple error that they had made. People with OCD happen to be very often type A people who are perfectionists, and they're looking for things to be in order. And when they make a mistake, it's not like you or I or somebody who can step back and say, oh, I'm so upset and that really stinks and I wish I didn't do it. And we feel bad about it. But someone with OCD will spiral on that, and they will spiral and try to figure out why it went wrong and perseverate on that problem. When we as managers create an environment where we've created a construct that says failure is learning, failure is another step towards success, and we prove that construct through our decisions and the way we respond when somebody doesn't do something well, we create a safe space where somebody who does have anxiety, OCD, will know that it's an accepted condition. It's something that is okay. And we reinforce that as leaders through the way we talk about it with one-on-ones with the person, in front of the team with our work reviews or after action reviews on projects. And we prove it over and over with the way that we connect with people in a daily basis around failure. if we don't construct that framework around success and failure as managers and build that into the way that we're interacting with our people, we leave that up to chance. And I've seen in my consulting experience, conditions that were created on manufacturing floors where leaders who did not create a positive construct around failure actually had people on a manufacturing floor hiding that failure and there were billable hours involved in it, and they were cheating the system and working really, really late and not reporting it. So their whole cost structure was impacted. So we know there's a huge value in our leaders setting that example and living the success failure construct. And I'm just going to leave this thought with another positive step you can do is in your recognition system, you're going to always be recognizing the great work, the successes. You can also recognize people with positive learning opportunity failures and make sure that that becomes part of the common experience and dialogue. So that also serves because, again, this is where we know that if we're taking personal risk and we're trying, which is critical for innovation, it's critical for agility, all those things that we're trying to do as organizations as we evolve, that I need to know that it's not going to be punitive if I don't succeed. And I brought up this quote by Amy Edmondson because another great reference for a book, The Fearless Organization, great read, and it'll help to set up a lot of great information and some steps you can take with that. And then I'm going to address a question that came up in the chat, and bear with me 1 second so I can pull it back up. It was, are there key things we can do to support employees when someone they work with comes across as very stressed or abrupt or curt to help build a more supportive work environment? And what I want to do is I want to bring this into another piece of this equation, which is our purpose and values, which to me is a way of saying we're giving something to mimic. Now, we all know as leaders, as in HR, we spend a lot of time identifying our purpose, articulating it, and our value system. But we don't spend as much time thinking about how that value system is actually teaching people how to behave. And so as we are working and doing our daily reviews, our coaching, our ongoing discussions, purpose and values become that way to show acceptable behavior and not acceptable behavior. So for the question that was in chat, if we as an organization value respect, we value collaboration, we value caring, if we have teammates that are not doing that and they're causing someone to be uncomfortable, we can create teachable moments and have those teachable moments be within the framework of this value system. And this echoes back to what I was saying about our support group. The support groups succeed because we show people how we help each other through. And that's by aligning to the principles of our support group, which creates that mimicry framework. So think about your purpose and values in a new way and start to connect them to how we might use them to support people with mental health challenges, people who might need that added layer of trust and openness and caring. In fact, we have an organization that I partnered with that we interviewed their clients as they were starting to set up their value structure. And one of the coolest things that turned out was they work very closely side by side with their clients as they bring them through a big process. And this is in the pharma industry. They're an outsourcer for the pharma industry. And the client said, I don't want people who are stressed out on my team. They're such an important part of our team. I want them to be happy and healthy and great contributors. And so we brought that back to the client. And as we shaped the values under the care value, it said we care about each other, but we care about each other's mental and physical well-being. We bring that element right into our value structure. And that was a big part of the work that we did there. So I encourage you to look at your values through the lens of how could we talk about this in the sense of creating a mentally healthy, psychologically safe environment. So the structure that I recommend is that we think about creating psychological safety by doing those cues and thinking about that environment we create rich with curiosity and the ability to challenge without risk. So really putting yourself in the shoes of, am I demonstrating that I have my people's back on a daily basis? And then I'm doing a great job of setting up those clear success and failure expectations. So I'm using and I'm setting a construct around failure, what it means and how we handle it here. And I'm using those values to show great behaviors, but I'm also using them to create those teachable moments so that we can keep people learning and growing together. And when we do this all really well and we start to pace it and start to do it on a daily basis, we start to create that magic in the space between us. I call it inspired human connection. So we're creating that space between us where we come together to accomplish work becomes that positive space. So let's think about Miguel really quickly. If he had had that sense of psychological safety, he would have known, like, for example, if Aaron had been there, he would have known that when things started to go wrong and his feelings inside were starting to change, he could have gone to start to talk about help. And he would have also been able to see, if he knew what success and failure looked like, he would have been able to see it's safe for me to fail, but I also understand what my team needs. And so if I know, for example, Miguel was having panic attacks as he was presenting, we know that he might need an accommodation where he doesn't have to stand and present. So he would know what success looks like, and he would know how he could prevent himself from failing by asking for the things he needs. And if we added that alignment to purpose and shared values and principles, he would have known that his company as a core value values the health and the well-being of the employees, and that he, by that right, is safe to go and ask for help and ask for support. It's how we live, it's how we interact. Just like Kevin was saying with MasterCard, they create that expectation of how we treat each other. And that's what would create a mentally healthy space. But the coolest thing about this, and as I love talking about this with HR leaders, is because you're doing a lot of this probably already, because all of these ingredients come together, and that actually creates an authentically diverse place. That is a place where inclusiveness is rich, where we know we feel safe to bring our whole selves to work, no matter what that self is like. And what I'm bringing for a background is part of who I am, and I'm bringing it forward. And then even another fun aspect is, and I've done some work in this area, is if you're transitioning to agile, agile is all about having people who feel confident that they can challenge, that they can innovate, they can be curious and ask questions, because the onus goes away from the manager for making decision and it goes to the employees to say, what's the better way? Help us find the better way. So all of this work is things that's just going to have that blossoming benefit, which I love and I encourage people to think about, because I think it makes a big difference. And so I'm going to bring you now to that framework. So we've talked a lot about those core ingredients and what can you start to do today. And I encourage you, and this is similar to what Kevin had shared in his findings, that, before you look at, building up, think about what you've created. And like I said in the beginning, if you're a manager who's come in and you've managed your process, you get it done, you're on time, but the human side, that safe space, has not been an easy shift for you, just address it, see it in yourself, and start to self-reflect on those areas by going back and looking at the belonging cues, and go back and look at what psychological safety and what that environment looks like. And just ask yourself, am I doing that yet? And pick a few things that you can do really well, and start to move forward with those, and just start practicing them. And that will start to, again, change people's beliefs and start to change the way they experience their work with you. The other thing that many of us don't do is have a solid understanding of our mental health resources. So what do I have? What can my company do? So I suggest going back and making sure that you get yourself in the know on what your employee resources are. What do you have for EAP programs? Do you have an ERG, like an employee resource group, that's been created in your diversity world, that's been created? And just start to understand, if someone were to come with you, where do I point them? What do we offer? And then the things that you can start doing, as I said, is live those norms. So assess where you are on them, and then just start doing it. Echo those belonging cues, live those psychological safety, environmental cues, and really start living and pulling your purpose and values in to create that framework for mimicry. Make sure you're clear on your expectations on success and failure. And then creating that space, as I mentioned, we want to keep that light bulb of belonging lit. So we've got to create that safe space where people have an opportunity. Your door is open, they can walk through it. So again, making sure that in your coaching conversations that you're leaving space for that well-being check. How are you today? What is happening? How are you handling COVID? So that you're asking those descriptive questions and allowing yourself that space to get some good answers. And we are going to be diving a lot more into the types of questions and those things in our next session. All right, so I'm going to go into quiz. So let's get you guys just thinking a little bit more. I'm going to ask, and this is from a little bit earlier, so I'll spend a minute and just throw it up in chat. Identify the symptoms below that depression and employee disengagement have in common. And we have apathy, anger, exhaustion, poor productivity, both A and C, or all of the above. And Shannon, I'll just have you just throw out a couple of answers for that.
Yep, majority are saying F, but we definitely have some E's in there as well.
Right. All right. The correct answer is F. So you guys got it. And it is all, and again, it's so interesting to see the amount of overlap and synergy there is between disengagement and depression. And I think that is one of the big ahas we hope that you'll leave with is I have to just ask myself, could it be? Could it be? And then we're going to get you all equipped to say, if the answer is yes, what do I do? So I would love to turn it over. Nathan, if you're up for jumping in, I'm happy to push for you, but thank you for this. And we're open to some questions in a few minutes, and would love to, Nathan, have you bring us home with this.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Nathan Lavoie, the Senior Vice President of Human Resources and Talent with Silverado, and we're a leading provider of memory care and assisted living communities and hospice care teams nationwide. At Silverado, we deal with we deal with life and death every day, but nothing prepared us for the global pandemic that we began to experience exactly 1 year ago. Our team was affected by the impact of COVID-19 in ways unimaginable, with several of our communities quickly experiencing outbreaks starting in March of 2020, enduring rapid loss of the residents that we love and care for every day, and in a few cases, some of our employees as well, through the series of waves and surges throughout the country. Caring for our employees since last spring continues to be the top of mind for Silverado, and ensuring that everyone is supported, particularly in the area of mental health, as we have experienced trauma and anxiety like never before. We didn't know where to start, but as Kathy mentioned in the beginning, we knew we had an EAP, but that wasn't going to cut it. By simply identifying the topic and saying out loud among our executive team and our leaders the term of mental health, and repeating that term until we had an understanding of what it meant to us personally, we were able to find tools and resources and develop programs, leaning on experts and specialists. And we were able to implement a cognitive behavioral program that focused on anxiety and traumatic stress management, similar to that Dr. Duckworth mentioned earlier in his presentation. With today's presentation, we've covered a lot, but I want to leave you with a couple of thoughts. First, we understand the foundation of what mental health really means and increase our understanding today of employee distress through the symptoms and behavior impact from our presenters. We don't have to wait until we have a company-wide policy or program in place to make a difference. As leaders, we can start to model for others and shift our behaviors to create an environment of safety and inspired human connection among our teams. Remember that we have the power to either grant or deny psychological safety with our choices and our actions that we make every day. Today, we can choose to create an environment of positivity and hope. Finally, remember that HR leaders, we are many things, but we are not therapists. But we have the power and the ability to create a safe and inclusive work environment and community, and we could be the one to connect our employees to the help that they may need. Please embrace the toolkit that Kathy just shared and begin to strengthen your foundations and understanding of mental health and the role it plays in your organization. I want to remind everyone that we look forward to continuing this discussion with everyone on April 28th to activate the new mentally healthy leadership practices and continue this discussion. And with that, we will open it up to any questions that anyone may have before we end the evening.
Thank you so much, Nathan. And I'm just going to point out right now for the audience that we are sending you out a toolkit that will summarize the learnings, and it will have some thinking prompts for you too. So you can do a little reflection on your own current state of psychological safety. That's going to come out but this week it'll be the next couple of days so that we can capture some of the insights that were shared today by some of the other speakers. All right. And then Shannon, do we have any questions coming?
I don't see any other questions. I
Great.
think we're good just to finish off.
Perfect. That's great. All right. I'm going to bring it here.
Yep, perfect. Thank you. Well, again, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. This is an important topic, and that's why we've broken it up into 2 sections. We really would appreciate your input with our upcoming survey that we'll send out to make sure that we make any shifts or align accordingly to your feedback for our next session. Before you jump off, I'm going to give you your SHRM and HRCI credit. So hold tight for 1 second. We definitely want to mark your calendars. This will be part of our follow-up invitation to you, which is our first DE&I event, which is at the end of the month, the other significant topic that's on all of our minds. So between mental health and DE&I, that is our focus at NHRA for 2021. So join us for that upcoming important discussion with wonderful speakers. Next slide, Deb. All right, and I need to just verbally tell you the HRCI and SHRM numbers. So get your pen out. If you missed this information, feel free to email us. But your HRCI credit for today is 551117. That's 551117. And your SHRM code for certification today is 21U76D6. That's 21U76D6. So any questions, reach out to us, and we are happy to assist you with that. And watch for a very extensive follow-up email with copy of the presentation, the toolkit, all sorts of wonderful items for your reference. All right. And with that, we say thank you to our speakers. Late night for those of our speakers that are actually on the East Coast. We really appreciate you today and wish all of you a wonderful evening. And we'll see you at part 2 next month. Thank you.